Welcome to this session on finding shared solutions and creating a more peaceful future. We have an impressive lineup for you this afternoon with our speakers in this session. My name is David Moore. I'm Dean of the BYU Law School. The other important characteristic to know about me is that I don't see well. And earlier this week, I lost my glasses taking my kids to Lagoon, and I'm realizing that's making this a little bit difficult. So apologies if I err in these introductions. Again, we've got a very distinguished panel and look forward to hearing from them. We will have hopefully some time for questions at the end. So there's a QR code that hopefully you've been using that during the session, feel free to input a question, and those will be queued up then ready for us after we hear from our speakers. We'll first hear from Sister Camille and Johnson, the president of the Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, an organization for adult female members of the church that is worldwide and includes about 7 million members. She will be followed by Imam Mohamad Bashar Arafat, who is the president of Civilizations Exchange and Cooperation Foundation, and also a chaplain of Johns Hopkins and the Baltimore Police. We'll then hear from Reverend Frederick A. Davie, who is the former vice chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. He just finished his term in May. He is also a senior strategic advisor to the president of Union Theological Seminary. Finally, we'll hear from Dave Gibbons, author, advisor, speaker. He is the founder and CEO of Dave Gibbons, LLC, the founding pastor of New Song Church, and a former board member of World Vision and Fuller Seminary. So please join me in welcoming our speakers, and we'll turn the time over to Sister Johnson.
Well, friends, I am honored and humbled to be with you this afternoon, and I am very happy to address the subject of creating a more peaceful future. I am certain we do so by empowering women's freedom of religion and belief. Today, I will share a portion of my remarks given in March at the European Union Parliament in Brussels, Belgium. That address was given in celebration of International Women's Day. I believe that women have been blessed with a unique moral compass, and that women possess special spiritual gifts and propensities to sense human needs, to comfort, teach, and strengthen. Accordingly, each of our communities depend upon ordinary women for human flourishing as they perform their unique roles as leaders, teachers, nurturers, healers, and peacemakers. The historical record and the empirical data are clear. Efforts to maintain social order by forcing homogeneity of belief or restricting beliefs always backfire, resulting in conflict and the tragic destruction of human potential. So I invite you to envision a world in which women cultivate, use, and expand their natural gifts, empowered to participate in a global sisterhood of peacemakers. If ordinary women are to accomplish their unique daily peacemaking roles, they themselves need to be inspired, nurtured, healed, empowered, and taught about their divine potential. This wellspring will come from their ability to seek daily, if not hourly, inspiration in the way their conscience dictates. They must be able to live according to their highest aspirations and values, and together share and organize for mutual support. This, of course, is what robust freedom of religion and belief affords: the assurance to women, men, and children that they can live conscientious, moral lives with mutual support of fellow believers while affording that same dignity to their neighbors. So imagine with me what would happen if every woman felt empowered within her sphere of influence to live out the full measure of her special gifts and propensities for nurture, care, healing, teaching, leading, and peacemaking. In almost all instances, when society or governments restrict women from living out their rights of conscience, we can expect poor outcomes. Poor outcomes within the home, with public health, with education, and with civil society. By extension, when religious freedom for women is protected, we can expect better outcomes in all those domains. But the fruits from such freedom go far beyond mere material well-being, because religion and spirituality constitute what is richest in humanity. Religion and spirituality connect us with the divine, finding expression through art, music, poetry, scripture, prayer, and devotions. And through these expressions, they connect us to one another. I believe that our shared womanhood provides yet another sacred connection. As women, we exist in an often unspoken global sisterhood. The tides and seasons of our biology and the universality of the way we bear and nurture humanity connect us wordlessly across cultural divides, language barriers, and political chasms. They create a common experience when no other obvious bridges exist. Because of the connectedness of women and of humanity's highest aspirations, I submit that the religious freedom of women is a key component to global peace. Our implicit sisterhood creates an ability to build on common ground which forms the basis of peace, a peace that is more than mere coexistence in the absence of war, but something much more beautiful and powerful, bringing individuality into a unified whole. I make that bold claim not out of wishful thinking, but from my lived experience as the current president of the Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of the world's oldest and largest women's organizations. The Relief Society now consists of nearly 8 million women, organized with more than 30,000 congregations around the globe. I have seen how this faith-based organization inspires women to unite in providing consistent acts of service within their homes and communities. I have seen what our women do when they are able to express their fullest selves and connect with others through our joint sisterhood. I have seen women elevate one another in the midst of poverty. I have seen women care for, feed, and nurture children who are not their own. And I have seen women stand to protect others from the ravages of war. When it lives up to its highest aspirations, our sisterhood provides the practical means of fulfilling Jesus Christ's admonition to love our neighbors and our friends, just as ourselves, thereby providing the conditions for lasting peace and human flourishing. Let me provide just a few specific examples. In the last decade, during the refugee crisis in Europe, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints across Europe pooled their time, talents, and treasure to assist many of the displaced peoples flooding into Europe because of regional conflicts, human rights abuses, and devastating economic hardship. Particularly noteworthy was the way that Relief Society members in the UK and France were moved to provide consistent, meaningful material and organizational support, regardless of ethnicity or religious background, in order to alleviate desperate conditions in those migrant camps. Although they came from different countries, cultures, and faith traditions, the common bond of faith was a critical aspect of why this support was particularly meaningful. Latter-day Saint women were attuned to the importance of honoring and accommodating the religious commitments of these refugees. Knowing the importance of their own faith-based commitments, Latter-day Saint women who helped to organize relief in these camps assured that religious prohibitions and preferences in food were provided for, and labeled clearly, that clothing and personal items provided were culturally appropriate and avoided symbols or imagery that might offend certain belief systems, and that separate spaces were provided for different faith groups to observe religious practices, and that communal living arrangements respected religious requirements. Such responsiveness is not uncommon or unique for the sisters in our organization. In the Philippines, Latter-day Saint women concerned about the high prevalence of malnutrition in their communities and how it was affecting their own families learned more about the devastating lifelong consequences of malnutrition. Moved by their love and unified by their faith, leaders of local congregations moved to action. With strong encouragement from the women of the Relief Society, leaders learned about the most common causes of malnutrition. Congregations hosted nutritional screenings in church buildings for member families and their neighbors, and then taught parents about good nutrition and referred those in need to local medical and community services that would provide treatment. These local efforts have been complemented with the church's humanitarian support for organizations that treat malnutrition and promote good nutrition throughout the Philippines. What started as a local church-led project to help member children has rippled far beyond those Filipino congregations. This effort is currently implemented in over 1,000 congregations in 12 countries. More than 16,000 children have been screened for malnutrition, and additional congregations are scheduled to launch child nutrition efforts in the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa, and Asia in the coming months. Indeed, drawing in no small part from the inspiration of this initiative, the Relief Society leads a church-wide humanitarian initiative to address the basic needs of women and children. We collaborate with other global organizations to prioritize maternal and newborn care, child nutrition, immunizations, and education throughout the world. While we can and will use our global reach to scale these women-inspired efforts, I believe that the most important and impactful work of women continues to be done when we care for our own children, when we teach a friend to read, patiently address the needs of an elderly neighbor, prepare a meal for the sick, or cry with a sister who is grieving. I strive to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. I believe he came to earth to save humanity from sin and death and to lift us from our sorrow and distress. His daily discipline, however, was always to reach out to those in anguish one by one. In private conversation with the socially outcast Samaritan woman at the well, pausing to comfort the hemorrhagic woman in the crowd, privately healing the young daughter of Jairus. In trying to emulate Jesus, I recognize that while my current work involves broad organizational efforts to improve conditions generally for women and children around the world, Christ's most important requirement for me as his disciple is to recognize immediate needs around me and respond with patience and love. I do that best when I am motivated spiritually and when I can freely unite with others in meaningful ways to address concerns. So my call to action today is simple and personal. While we must act justly and responsibly in our roles as leaders, let us not neglect the individuals within our immediate circle of care. I urge you to pause with me for a moment and connect, however you do that, with your highest source of inspiration, and then wait quietly for guidance about whose life you can meaningfully improve today with an act of compassion. Write it down and do it. I hope that simple exercise will help us recognize that our greatest success will be in unleashing the power of a global sisterhood, by unleashing the power of women as expressed through faith and conscience. Women who express such faith from any faith tradition or spiritual background will then undoubtedly serve those around them. This service, especially when rendered alongside other women of faith and across cultural divides, will empower the peacemaking capacity of our global sisterhood. Women's engagement in their congregations and families and communities will create a wave of empathy and compassion. The sisterhood of women, unburdened by prejudice and oppression, can unite across boundaries through the simplest of acts. Now, for us in this room, from our unique vantage as leaders, we can and must also assess and address concerns at a societal level. We can and must seek for ways to remove unnecessary burdens and restrictions on women. We can and must stand together for freedom of religion and belief. We cannot, however, reach every person in the world, no matter how well funded our programs, well penned our policies, or well developed our diplomacy. But through a global sisterhood, we can reach every single soul. Empowering women's freedom of religion and belief helps us to achieve our highest aspirations. Reaching across faith boundaries builds peace and empowers our global sisterhood. Friends, we can achieve what no government can, a global sisterhood of peacemakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Johnson, and thank you for your patience with the technology. Imam Arafat, please.
I'm sorry, it's just reloading. But as I'm waiting, I just would like to make two corrections. I'm the former campus imam at Johns Hopkins University from 93 to 2003. I'm sorry I didn't see this. And also the former Baltimore Police Department, right now volunteer, and with Annapolis Police as well. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with all of you. And I'm really, truly humbled by this invitation. And I'm honored to be here among my brothers and sisters. Same. Sisters and brothers in faith, because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Islam have similarities and differences. But the similarities are far more than the differences, especially when it comes to our faith in God, prophets, scriptures, holy places, importance of family, chastity, helping those in need, and much, much, much more. Here in America, we also share the same constitution that provides religious freedom to people of all faith, traditions, and even no traditions. It is because of that Constitution and the flag of the United States that represent the Constitution. I told my sheikh in 1988, as I was graduating from the Sharia University and Seminary, that I'm really amazed how these Kuwaiti tanks raised the American flag during the Iran-Iraq war as they are going through the Hormuz Strait, so Iranian jets will not target them. And I was also amazed by the hostages in Lebanon in the 80s, that just because this Marine is American, then back then Reagan will ask for his release. So my sheikh still like, where are you going with this? I said, so how about if I will also be an imam under the American flag. And I have read about the Constitution of the United States. He said, Bismillah, go. Later on, I became Imam at the Islamic Society of Baltimore. I'm saying this because America that I knew back then and when I came to the United States is completely now a little bit different America. I never in my life have heard the constant name callings and fear mongering about the other and the disrespect of our governing body's rule of law and the differences of political ideologies. Identity, including race, gender, ethnicity, and other topics, have become lightning rod subjects for hundreds of bills in state legislatures across the country as Americans across the political spectrum seek to define the nation's values. Debate over these issues is intensifying as candidates gear up for the 2024 presidential cycle. We have seen what is happening in Europe even this month, and the rise of the far-right groups and the protest from Brussels to other European cities in the late only few days. Wise clergy, well-trained clergy today have no choice but to step in and guide the nonsense. They have to push the red buttons of danger that the society needs our help. I feel truly that the clergy in America have a tremendous amount of responsibility. They have no choice. Why? Because the politicians now need help. They really do need help. From my perspective, this can and should be done through the interfaith approach. Clergy, churches, mosques, synagogues, and other places of worship, civil society, religious and educational groups all need to come up with practical programs urgently that are innovative and increase the interreligious understanding through educational curricula and dialogue. If we do not do that, not only will our strong democratic foundation crack, but also our international relations will start being questioned and deteriorate. I'm saying that because I travel all the time back and forth between America and the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia. And I just wanted to share with you that while I was the campus imam at Johns Hopkins University, listening to the concept of clash of civilizations, that was, late 90s, early 2000, I said, I have to make that kind of change. So that's why we started Civilizations Exchange, to let the people know that really we are talking about civilizations helping each other, not the clash of civilizations. Later on, working with the State Department, I had to start this seminary, Al-Bashir, seminary to talk about religious diplomacy. So I'm delighted to speak today with you about your wonderful, important topic. And here, that is actually my topic about finding shared solutions and creating a more peaceful future. From my perspective, those kind of civilizations in different parts of the world are really needed to be visited, studied, and for us to hear the lessons and the voices that heard by your spirit and by your intellect, not by your ears, in order to benefit from these lessons. And I would like just to share with you a practical 5 things that we are trying to do humbly according to our means. And that's because when we started this CECF and we started our first programs, the State Department, they called and they asked, they said, we have heard from Cardinal Keeler in Baltimore about CECF. can you tell us more? So when I explained, they said, oh, can we have a cup of tea? And then that led to different kind of programs together. The first one was, can you please provide services for the cultural exchange students? They are coming from all over the world. Then later on, we started this conference for cultural exchange students who are coming from 81 countries now, providing religious cultural support as well as to see by themselves while they are living here for one academic year, the importance of cultural diversity and religious diversity in this country. And we started these conferences in Baltimore, and then it now grew to different countries around the world, and we just finished the 52nd conference. But then the State Department said, now I'm saying that just to let you know that we have responsibility nationally and internationally. And then they said, would you travel and speak about Muslim life in America and your experience in America? That later on led for us to come up with a program similar to the IVLP, International Visitors Leadership Program, but we call it International Observer Program, where students from Al-Azhar University or Al-Qurawiyyin and other notable and remarkable institutions to come by themselves and see, since 2011, the kind of programs and life that we as Muslims in America living, and thank God it was funded by different embassies around the world. And this is the Grand Imam saying that if these programs for Al-Azhar are funded by the embassy, and if it's run by CECF, we know Imam Arafat, it's okay. And now we have 7 delegations who came, and now we are working with the alumni who came and they went back, not only to Egypt, but also to Belgium, East Africa, different countries in Central Asia, and so on and so forth. The reason I'm saying that, because I have asked those kind of students who studied theology, you have studied theoretically, but did you do any practical training for somebody to take you either to Europe or to the United States? All of them, they said no. It was because of the funding by the US embassies in those countries and more, all of these programs are happening. And today, really, I feel that there is going to be a reformation on Islam and the Muslim life in other countries coming from America because of the Constitution of the United States. And that's why I just wanted to share with you quickly in those minutes that now it's not only these programs are done here in the United States, but also the follow-up in those countries and following up with these alumni in different countries to apply the lessons that they have learned here in America. You have seen Central Asia, and now this is quickly in East Africa. Constantly, these kind of interfaith relations are so much needed. But by myself or others, even here in America, one religion is no longer about Muslims, it's no longer about Christians, it's about all of us. To reach out with this kind of interfaith approach, and here again, just some of these samples. Before I go to the next, I'm here, and to the third, and that is academic interfaith exchange. And this is something we just have done because of COVID, so we had to make this experience as a curriculum and share it with universities in the United States. And thank God the first university started with from California, and this program took place by visiting Spain, Andalusia, Spain, and Morocco, but starting from Washington, D.C. We have never seen people going to talk about the Inquisition and what happened in Europe before, starting from the Office of Religious Freedom from Washington, D.C., in order to talk about the current situation right now, not only visiting Cordoba, Sevilla, and these places, and as you know, those mosques used to be big mosques, and now they are churches. And this is another topic for another conference, about the places of worship that changed either into a mosque or mosques changed into churches. But the interesting thing is when they came to Morocco, and here I would like the help of my friend Chris to see by yourself that those students, when they entered this Muslim university in Tatwan, the students were amazed that this is now American students coming to us. So our students were a little bit shy to come forward, and they were shy to come forward until I said, excuse me, when are you going to come and welcome them?
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
أهلا وسهلا. ما شاء الله.
Oh, okay.
So they are here to greet you.
And they got encouraged. But this is across the board. We need somebody to encourage us to come and talk. But then after that, it was an amazing experience for both the Americans and the Moroccans.
Thank you very much.
And that's where I would like to go back, Chris, to my presentation, if I may. And that's the graduation. The fourth thing I just would like to share with you quickly is the richness of interspiritual dialogue. Excuse me, we talk about interfaith dialogue, but I would like to share with you the interspiritual dialogue. You have heard this morning the prayers. Many of you, they were so kind to come and tell me I was touched, even though I didn't understand Arabic, but I felt the spirit. This is something normally we don't talk about, and that was part of my PhD about the Sultan and the Saint, Saint Francis, who went and visited the Sultan of Egypt 800 years. And that was an amazing, amazing impact on Saint Francis, who came back. This is now a big movement in the Baltimore, Washington area, where the Catholic University of America accepted to do a conference with us just before COVID about the 800 years anniversary. Of course, why I started this CECF, because I got sick and tired of people thinking about my religion of extremist groups or Bin Laden or ISIS or Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram. What about the saint and the sultan? What about the contribution of Islamic civilization of Spain to the European Renaissance? So that is the interfaith, the interspiritual dialogue that you only heard a little bit about it this morning. Number 5, and the last one, the Caravan of Peace. Caravan of Peace, I shared it with the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, Miss Alice Nederu, and she is the Undersecretary General, Special Advisor of Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide. She came to our conference, the 52nd conference, 2 months ago. Here she is speaking. But when she came from New York to Baltimore, and we picked her up from the train station, that was the welcome to her by the students, and she was really amazed. She said, Imam, I really see that you have the United Nations here. And she was also amazed to see the flags of countries that they are fighting each other. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Greece. And she was amazed to hear how the students, after 5 days of this BUBW, now they are really talking about how can we do something in order to make a change in our countries. And that's why all of that is part of the School of Religious Diplomacy. And that is the vision to empower clergy and community leaders to embrace religious pluralism and cultural diversity as part of the divine plan, and support leaders to understand and appreciate that diversity is the strength, and thus to be, number one, develop structures of cooperation in building communities of peace and justice. Number two, help communities understand the impact of global issues and its impact on them. And number three, support a vigorous educational coursework to build a global cooperation. And thank God for the government of Kazakhstan, who said, can you also come and share this at our summit, the 7th summit. In closing, I just would like to say that we are living through challenging times. These are the times when the world is looking to interfaith collaboration on peace and justice in America, and the American Muslim community is a bridge now more than ever before between America and the Muslim world. I'm here to let you know that this is a teamwork which will make the dream work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam Arafat. We'll turn the time over to Reverend Davie.
Thank you, Dave. And I have a fancy new little iPad here. Doesn't work. I have an iPhone to back it up. And if that doesn't work, Pastor Roberts, if you're here, I'm going to depend on the Spirit. And for a Presbyterian, that's a pretty scary thing. So we'll see how we do. But let me thank my fellow panelists. Dave, let me thank you for that introduction. I'd also like to thank Professor Brett Scharfs and it's about not to work, and John Ammons, who invited me here initially, the administration of BYU Law School, the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and everyone who had anything to do with the planning of this event, which I found to be an amazing gathering of people who are really interested in interfaith and interreligious cooperation. Needless to say, it's an understatement to emphasize how important and timely this conversation is, given what's going on around the world, as we've heard at different points today. And I come to you in this conversation, as Dave said, having recently completed 4 years on the United States Commission of International Religious Freedom, where in the last year I served as vice chair. And I believe that experience might shed some light and insight on finding shared solutions to create a more peaceful future. Let me just say a word about the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF as we call it. It was created 25 years ago by Congress as a part of a landmark International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. And over the years, one priority has remained constant for this commission, for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and that is a commitment to bipartisanship. In fact, bipartisan support for U.S. efforts to promote religious freedom abroad is actually written into the law. And over the years, the Commission has served as an independent U.S. government voice on international religious freedom or belief, reporting unflinchingly on country conditions around the world, making recommendations to Congress and successive White House administrations. So how does this experience of USCIRF, this U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, speak to the topic we have here this afternoon? Well, first, the core of USCIRF's success is that it is bipartisan. Commissioners are appointed by Republicans and Democrats by law. Commissioners differ on issues, as you might expect us to, but we remain firmly united to the commitment of religious freedom as a priority for U.S. foreign policy, and thus religious freedom abroad for all faiths and for those of no faith. So that's the first sort of contribution I think this commission can make to the notion of shared solutions for moving things forward in the area of freedom of religion or belief. The second would be that the foundations for this commitment are found in international covenants that this country and other countries have signed on to. Those are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Articles 18 of both of these covenants, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we call UDHR, and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, which we call ICCPR, protect the freedom of religion or belief, or FORB. And FORB empowers individuals to manifest their religion or belief as they see fit, subject only to the narrow limitations specified in international law. Article 2 of both of these documents grant that everyone has the right to enjoy all the rights and freedoms guaranteed in these documents without any distinction of any kind. So any person, anywhere around the world, in nations that have signed on to these documents, have the right to enjoy freedom of religion or belief without any restrictions applied. Article 26 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights also guarantees a prohibition on discrimination on certain grounds, including religion, sex, or gender, which includes sexual orientation. And I'll say more about that later. And Article 6, subsection 2 of the ICCPR, or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, provides that death sentences may not be imposed for those most serious crimes. Let me say it differently. Death sentences may only be imposed for the most serious crimes, which does not include nonviolent acts. So religion then is not a legitimate justification for egregiously violating the fundamental rights of individuals. So just to say it plainly, in some countries, you can simply be put to death for things that you practice and for who you are. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that as well. And then the existence of a state or majority religion cannot result in the impairment of rights for individuals under ICCPR. And that just simply says if you have a majority religion, you can't impose that religion on religious minorities. So then there are two principles, I think, that operate here that I think we should consider in support of religious freedom and religious pluralism. And they are, keep the conversations bipartisan and diverse with people across the theological and ideological spectrums, and work at adhering to a set of fundamental principles and values related to freedom of religion or belief or religious pluralism that are available to all human beings. Again, let's have agreement on some fundamentals of what it means to exercise freedom of religion or belief. Let's have documents that we adhere to that provide that, and then let's agree to have the conversations around those documents and be diverse and involve all people of a particular culture. During my tenure at USERF, we faced many thorny issues, and I want to address two very briefly. Religious freedom and LGBTQ issues, and the freedom of women and girls, religious freedom of women and girls. And for each of my 4 years on USERF, commissioners, Republicans and Democratic appointees found common ground on these issues and agreed to hold the line on those who wanted us to say nothing about these, and we held the line on those who wanted us to do more than our congressional mandate allowed. As another former USERF commissioner pointed out in a USERF Spotlight podcast, USERF recognizes the protection of LGBTQ plus religious freedom must be a component of U.S. government international religious freedom promotion, and we must do that, again, not as involvement or interference with international legal debates that belong to religious communities themselves. In other words, we want to promote religious freedom for LGBTQ people, but not interfere with how religious communities deal with those issues themselves. So promote it as government policy, but what you do in your congregations, in your churches, in your religious communities around those issues should not be interfered with by government. So that was sort of a first principle for us. But we also believe that there should be a removal of state punishment and the execution of LGBT persons by any government. Again, removing the execution and punishment of LGBTQ people as policy should not interfere with the theological positions that religions or faith groups might take in regard to that. So if a denomination wants to promote the execution of LGBTQ people, you should have the right to do that as a denomination within your denomination. What we say in terms of religious freedom is a denomination would not have the right to do that in public policy as a part of public policy and have that policy imposed on everyone else. So we found common ground in the area of removing punishment and removing death penalties and executions and criminalization of LGBTQ folks and LGBTQ plus behavior. A second area where we found common ground was on women's rights and on women and girls. Here we found that several key issues of agreement that are outlined in a recent USERF report. So let me do these quickly. First, we agree that that child and early forced marriage and related restrictions should be opposed. Many governments and civil society actors recognize child and early forced marriage as a leading impediment to women's rights and to girls' health and to access to education and to workforce participation. Child, early, and forced marriage has a variety of drivers, but it is in many contexts given religious justification despite the harm incurred and the lack of full consent. While many legislatures have passed laws to counter child, early, and forced marriages, challenges remain, including the lack of enforcement in rural communities, the prevalence in some countries of unregistered religious marriages conducted outside of the legal sphere. The issue is further complicated in situations of sectarian tension or conflict, where governmental or societal actors seeking to preserve religious demographics may interfere with human rights of interfaith couples and limit the rights of women to freely choose their spouses. For example, in India has witnessed mob violence and forced marriage annulment arising from fears of so-called love jihad, or allegedly coercive and seduction and conversion of non-Muslim women by Muslim men. That's in India. While in Burma, interfaith marriage law restricts the ability of Buddhist women to marry men of other religions. So USERF found, Democrats and Republicans found common ground on opposing forced marriages and opposing the interference of women to choose their partners. A second area where we found agreement in terms of women and girls was on sexual and gender-based violence. Victims of religious discrimination or marginalization are awfully uniquely vulnerable to sexual or gender-based violence, including sexual assault, rape, harmful practices like female genital mutilation. And these communities also have extremely limited access to legal recourse. Government and non-state actors sometimes perpetrate or tolerate sexual and gender-based violence in order to intimidate or drive out disfavored religious groups, such as Yazidi women in ISIS-controlled territory, Falun Gong and Uyghur detainees in China, and religious and ethnic minorities, including Rohingya Muslims and Cajun Christians in Burma. So a third area where we found agreement in terms of women and girls was the protection of women's human rights defenders and their religious freedom. In many countries, human rights defenders who work on women's rights are often challenged in terms of religious or traditional consensus in expressing their dissenting beliefs. They challenge religious or traditional beliefs by expressing dissenting beliefs. And as a consequence, many women's human rights defenders may face charges of blasphemy, insulting religion, or related charges. In one example, the Malaysian civil society group Sisters of Islam is subject to a fatwa from a state-affiliated body declaring that these women are deviant and that the materials they produce are subject to seizure due to the fact that they address issues of human rights, including gender equality and women's empowerment. In Sudan, which is, of course, exploding right now, women's rights and activists have been both subjected to sexual and gender-based violence and have been accused of apostasy in order to forestall their work. While in Iran, activists, writers, and artists who peacefully advocate for women's rights have been imprisoned under the range of charges, including insulting Islamic sanctities. While women's human rights defenders are at particular risk for such religious freedom violations, all are at risk when dissenting from religious justifications used as a pretext to commit violence against women. Now, Youth Serve commissioners issued a report highlighting these areas of religious-based violence and oppression of women and girls with unanimous approval of all the commissioners for the report, and then promoted a series of recommendations for U.S. foreign policy to address these issues. Again, Democrats and Republicans across the ideological and theological scale supporting these issues related to women and girls. Let me just mention two other things, and then I'll stop and sit down. In smaller or no less significant ways, commissioners have cohered across political and theological lines to support the commission itself. When a high-ranking congressional staffer said to commissioners, myself included, and other people in various public settings, that if this commission faced an existential crisis, if it did not stop addressing LGBTQ plus issues, and if it did not purge all of its documents of any reference to the same. A high-ranking congressional staffer said the commission would be put out of business and funding denied if we did not stop addressing those issues. Not a single commissioner stepped forward to support that staffer's position, and the chair of the commission at that time, a Republican appointee, stated simply, "We're not going to do that." Likewise, when human rights advocates insisted that USERF position itself in particular spaces on women and girls and LGBTQ plus issues, USERF commissioners discussed it and declined to go further than the boundaries of our congressional mandate allowed us. So whether from the right or from the left, this group of bipartisan commissioners found consensus on how to stay true to our mission, even when threatened with extinction by the very people who fund the commission. In a bit more dramatic and personal situation, on a trip to Saudi Arabia this past March, our chair at the time, an Orthodox rabbi, whom I joined for this trip, was asked on this official trip to remove his kippah by an official of the Saudi government, even though we were there on an official trip as a U.S. government agency to advance the cause of religious freedom. Our chair was told to remove his kippah or to leave the venue. He and I immediately agreed he would not remove it, and we were then told to leave or we would be escorted out by security. After many phone calls and to no avail, we left the venue. And our chair appropriately said he wanted to leave the country. And I said, if he left, then the rest of our delegation would leave with him. And in spite of the efforts by both the Saudi government and our own government to get him to stay, and then if he wouldn't stay, to get me to stay, we left in solidarity because of the principles of freedom of religion or belief for which we stood in solidarity. He was a Republican-appointed, conservative, Orthodox rabbi, conservative in his theological and political beliefs. That's not how anyone would describe me. But yet we were staying there out of solidarity because I believed, we were there to promote the cause of religious freedom, and we weren't going to let anyone divide us in that stance, in that position. So suffice it to say that sharing shared solutions to create a more peaceful future is possible across lines of difference in the freedom of religion or belief space. Perhaps some of the successes YouServe commissioners have had over the decades as a bipartisan entity, albeit sometimes with intense discussions and debate, can provide effective practices that might be relevant in other spaces as well. I end here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Davie. You'll notice we have perfect symmetry in this session. We began with a Dave, we'll end with a Dave, Dave Gibbons. We're running out of time, but we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
All right. Let's see here. All right, you'll be glad to know I'm the last speaker, probably. You know, in a 4-member track relay, the 4th person's supposed to be the fastest, right? So I'll do my best. Well, my name is Dave Gibbons, and you're probably wondering where Gibbons comes from. My dad's white, and my mom's a 5-foot-tall Korean woman. As you can tell, Koreans have some pretty strong genes. I'm part of the evangelical delegation, part of the affirmative action side of it. And Bob Roberts is the one who invited me, so thank you, Bob. I want to thank the hosts, Milt and Heidi. Thank you for hosting us. You've been such kind guides for us through the last several days. And also our drivers, Big D over here on my right, and then also Joe and Jenna and a young blonde-haired man. And then we had Elder Hollins and also Ahmed. He was a fantastic person. Okay, try one more time. Is that it? Okay. Yeah, so I was probably 5 years into the nonprofit world as a pastor. I had not intended to be a pastor. My goal was just to make as much money as possible. I wanted to be a businessman. But what happened is I went into the ministry, and we could talk about that some other time. But what happened is, about my 5th year in this large church on the East Coast of Maryland, we just had our first daughter. And then after a couple years, we had our second child on the way. And if you know Asian cultures, it's imperative and somewhat important to have a man-child at some point. And, you know, we're praying for one, of course, to have a boy at some point. We, you know, of course, we believe they're equal, we're egalitarian, but, you know, we thought it'd be a good balance. And what happened is all the very spiritual people in our community started praying for us, and they're very revelatory in their abilities, and they started saying, hey, this is going to be a boy for sure. They started feeling my wife's stomach. They started looking at her. They caught her vibe, and they go, oh, yeah, this is a boy. And so respecting them, I couldn't wait to have my boy. Finally, time came where my wife looked at me and said, it's time to go to the Howard County General Hospital. And there, my wife laid on the table. She got the epidural, and then everything was good. And after the epidural, I was watching some TV, all right? And then finally, Dr. Smith-Wason said, hey, Dave, it's time to deliver the child. And she said, would you like to help? And I said, of course. And she goes, well, come on in. Now, be very careful. The baby is really slippery. And so I got in there in my old football position like this. And she goes, I take your 2 index fingers and put them into the armpits and then pull the baby out very slowly. So I got in there and put my 2 fingers into the armpits, and I pulled the baby up, and I held the child like Mufasa in Lion King. And I said, it's a boy! It is a boy! And Dr. Smith-Wason said, no. It's a girl. In America, we call this an umbilical cord. You know, sometimes things aren't quite the way they appear to be. And I think that's true when it comes to when we think about creative solutions and collaboration in the world of transformation as we know it. You know, I've been involved with this for quite a while where, you know, for the last 30 plus years, I've been in NGO work with World Vision, 9 years as a board member there. Then I launched incubators, economic incubators, and also like these educational incubators in Southeast Asia. We led large youth movements in South America and Brazil. And then we worked in the Row in LA for the last 15 years. We were doing resources development in Santa Ana, California, which is one of the most under-resourced cities in America. So I've been involved with this quite a bit. I'm still not an expert. But I think there are some ideas that maybe for this general population for us this afternoon that would help us is maybe some design principles. Versus me just giving you all the projects I'm doing, I thought it'd be more helpful for you practically if I just gave you some thoughts in terms of some reflections that maybe would help us to move towards action. Does that sound good? All right, so the first thing I'd like you to think about, there's just 4 really quick ideas. Oh, by the way, I did have a girl, and she's the one next to my wife, all right? And I did eventually have a son, okay, as you can see. And so my wife and I, we've been married 40 years this month. The first principle is the culture of and. A lot of this has to deal with your mindset, how you think. If you go into it like with a messianic idea or complex, thinking you're going to save the world, you're probably ruin wherever you go. And so you really have to think about, maybe there's possibly another way. We've been raised in our silos in this very homogeneous culture. And so you've developed your own language, your analogies, your narratives, and they're very fixated. And unless you have this understanding that maybe there's other ways that people think different than me, then it's sometimes very hard to move forward. So I think this culture of and is critical. So instead of thinking binarily like we normally do, right or left, Republican or Democrat, and liberal or conservative, affirming, non-affirming. All these are important to us. But maybe there's also, when it comes to work in humanitarian efforts, it can be an and. It doesn't have to be either or. When I think about and, I think about this book named The Medici Effect. This is a really awesome book. I read this probably, 15, 20 years ago by a guy named Franz Johansson, and he was from Harvard and is now a consultant. And I thought he was brilliant. He studied the Dark Ages, and he studied this family, the Medici family, and he found that they were very wealthy. And he brought these people of different cultures and sectors together, and they clashed. There were the sciences, the medicines, business, different people from different nations. And when they brought them all together, what happens is the innovation occurred. They said this helped launch the Renaissance era. So, especially during this moment where we see so much deconstruction and chaos, the way we're going to move to creativity is hanging out with people not like us. And so here's the thought. The greatest innovation happens when cultures converge. So who's the person in your city not like you that you can start hanging out with? Who's really different than you? And, fundamentally, a lot of us who are religious, we believe in that great commandment, the Great Commission. Love God and love your neighbor. The neighbor's not someone that looks like you, talks like you. When Jesus was asked that question, he was very Eastern in his response. He was like my favorite sage, wise theologian, Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee, he says, become like water. He didn't have this one style of martial arts. It depended upon the situation. And Jesus, when he answered that question, like, who is my neighbor, he told the Good Samaritan story. Someone not like you, in fact, someone you would hate and feel very uncomfortable around. So who is that? For me, I literally changed my schedule around because I noticed I had a lot of black friends in college and also, when I was younger in high school and middle school. But as I got involved in the pastor, I noticed how a lot of people look just like me. And also there's a social and economic similarities, upper middle class or wealthy. And I said, I don't know what it's like with some of my black friends right now. So I literally put 10% of my schedule and I diverted, said, I'm gonna start hanging out with some of my black friends again. I need to find out what's going on in their life. So literally, it's this very practical thing. You think and. If you really want to live out the commandment that we all believe religiously, it's loving someone not like you. And that's not really a like. You may not like it. It's a very painful process, but it's a process that you choose to enter into. I have this guy that I've been working with, and his name is Dan Lin. And he met me in a Whole Foods grocery store, and he knew I was a consultant. I'm also a senior advisor. I'm both bivocational. So I advise VC founders and also entertainment industry leaders and professional athletes. And so he was a Hollywood guy. He produced a little movie you maybe heard about called the Lego Movie. And when he called me, he was in the process of making this movie. And so before he left, I asked him, I go, hey, by the way, what movie are you working on? He goes, oh, this movie called the Lego Movie. In my mind, I said, oh, that's a stupid movie. But it then became like one of the best-selling movies in history. It was the second highest grossing film in the history of filmmaking in the month of February. The only one that beat it was The Passion of Christ. And Dan said, it's okay to be second to Jesus. So he made the Lego Movie, and it was fascinating. I said, well, how did you do this, man? It's such a creative work of art, because it's a deep narrative really about a father-son and their relationship. And it's like a gospel or like a biblical type of story, if you really look at the underpinnings of it. And so he said, it was really hard. He said, in fact, right before we were to release, several months into it, it looked horrible. It was like a failure. And it was so bad, they were thinking about shelving it. So he said he hired the guys, the directors that did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And he brought them in. And they started working with Dan, and Dan's from the Wharton School of Business. And he's really like orderly in the way he does things. After several weeks, they came into his office and said, we quit, Dan. And he goes, why? He's befuddled. They said, well, you're perfectionists. They said, our culture is fail often and fail fast. This is what you have to think about. When you're really stepping in and devoting an intentional time to loving someone not like you, it's a difficult work. You have to expect failures. You're experimenting. Innovations, it's a normal part. Any entrepreneur will tell you that. So it's almost like Guy Kawasaki in his book called Rules for Revolutionaries. He said Apple computer never would have been created unless they took a stance that they had a version 1 mindset, that there was going to be a version 2, 3, 4, but let's put out the best we can and let others know it's not perfect. Version 1 mindset. The culture of and. It's not either or, it's both and. Go for it. You'll never experience the sacred more than when you can love someone not like you. Because come on, what's the big deal if you can just love someone like you? Anybody can do that. People can probably sense maybe God exists in you when you can love someone that you hate, possibly, or that hates you. Man, we can just go home after that. Come on. That's the truth right there. Now, the second principle is the power of one. There's some mention of this earlier. I come from the idea within the different industries to just scale. It's always up and to the right. And so with my church life, I built multi-sites globally. We had hubs in Paris, Mexico City, Bangkok, and multiple cities in America. Our average age constituency was 28 years of age. And so we were one of the fastest growing churches in America at the time. And what happened is it started to concern me, though, because I saw that I was literally creating an illusion of success by the numbers of people that were coming to our meetings. And I knew in reality, they're just checking in, and it was like good talk, and they get excited, and they got chills maybe, but then afterwards, it's over. It's because in our culture, there's this idea that insights can become illusions to transformation. So just because you have an insight, you think you're changed. Your body somehow changes a little bit, you get a little shivers, you go, wow, I was transformed. But the truth is you did nothing. So insights can become illusions to transformation. So I was really, I think, fueling that illusionary idea with the people I was dealing with. And so I was getting concerned, and it's a long story, but I eventually went to Thailand with my family for 1 year. And does that mean I got to stop? Yeah, I'm going to stop. I can stop now. I don't need to go on. Yeah, because we need to do Q&A. I can stop now. No, I don't mind stopping. I want to make sure people get some Q&A.
We're actually over time, so we won't have Q&A, but we'd love to hear your
Hey, you don't need to see all the pictures and stuff. So what happened is the power of one idea. So what happened, this guy named Boyd came to my life when I was in Thailand. And he saw me speak somewhere, and after the speaking engagement, he said, hey, I think you could help me out, man. He goes, I come from a Buddhist background. My business is failing in music, and I think you can help consult me. And I said, yeah, I'd be glad to, bro. And so we started hanging out. And then I started to love this guy because he's so humble. And I found out this guy was like a major player in music and entertainment in all of Asia. So as I was meditating on this one day, I felt I heard a voice. Now, I come from a fundamentalist background that doesn't believe you can hear voices sometimes from God, but I thought I heard a voice. And I thought I heard a question. How long would it take you to reach or to impact, you think, the nation of Thailand? And I said, I don't think I could do that in my lifetime because Thai by itself is very difficult. And then I heard, how long do you think it'd take Boyd to reach the nation of Thailand? Well, Boyd was a composer of music that everybody sang, including the royalty. He had 80% brand recognition in the nation of Thailand of 65 million people. 50 million people knew who Boyd was. He would say, hey, we're going to have a concert, 50,000 people show up. And then suddenly I said, it would take Boyd 1 day. And then you know how Matrix, all the numbers started falling down? There was an epiphany. I said, oh my goodness. I don't have to work as hard. Maybe if God could lead me to the one, we could change a city. We could change a nation. We could change the world. If I'm willing to be second, more could be accomplished. The power of one. And I leave you with this thought, because this was the most important point. There's four, but I'll just leave you with the third last one. I think the third design principle to consider is spiritual intelligence. It's called SQ. I've been looking for a language for this, because in the marketplace, it gets really awkward when people try to just do prayer groups and invite people to your church, somehow. It's weird, and you don't know how to do it. And you feel like guilty because you're not witnessing or sharing. And so I said, what is the language of the marketplace? And I said, you know what it is? Like in the church, they call it discipleship. In the marketplace, they call it human development. It's people development. And it's where you care for the employee or the people working for the company, and you really know them. You assess their beauty. their skills, their weaknesses, and then you help them to achieve these awesome goals. And I said, wow. I said, that takes spiritual intelligence. And so this executive from Brazil, when I was traveling there, he came up to me and said, have you ever read the book by Dohar called SQ? I said, never read it. And I read it, and as I was reading it, I said, this is beautiful. He's given us a language of how to engage. It's about spiritual intelligence. Now, spirituality is not religion. Religious is about, just do's and don'ts lots of times. But spirituality is about meaning, purpose, significance, and transcendence. And so I go, yeah, everybody cares about that. So I'm going to start talking like in the language of the people, and I can still embrace Jesus, who I believe in is my God. And so what happened is I started positioning myself differently because I had separated, again, binarily, my work from my sacred activity. So if you're a business guy, you're an entrepreneur or a woman, how do you make it so that it flows? It's symbiotic. And so you have to practice. It takes some experimentation and work. But eventually I create this idea of, it's about human development. It's about a leadership pipeline that we can help people flourish. And eventually, if they're doing well, it's going to help the profits of the company. And the best employees are going to stay around. So what happened is, as I started looking at these people as like humans, not like as projects or people to be won, and using my spiritual intelligence where I could engage them in meaningful conversations, I suddenly found myself acting very differently because they're made in the image of God, right? And so if they're purely made in the image of God, Imago Dei, that means if I believe that, that means it's not only about my textual reading of the Bible where God can speak to me, but it's actually going to be through maybe human beings. Maybe there's no greater portal of the communication of God than through a human being. And my understanding of LDS is that the prophets have a pretty big say in terms of revelation. And so I'm saying, well, what if we saw people this way, that potentially any individual, Christian or not, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, whoever, they're made in his image. What if God could be speaking to me through them? Would you listen differently? Would you pay attention differently if you knew that God could be speaking to you? So I tried practicing this in closing. And as I was practicing it, I just tried to be in the mind of trying to figure this out. I was called to New York City, and when I was called to New York City, this hedge fund guy was flying me out every month, and he had this car come pick me up, limo, and take me to LAX. And usually, after Sunday, if I'm in church, I'm an introvert, by the way, so I really like the company of just me, myself, and I don't mind talking to myself. And so getting into the car, that limo was always like a beautiful time, an hour drive to LAX. So I put on my headphones as the driver picked me up, and I'm putting on my music. I'm ready just to chill for the next 6-7 hours before I get to New York. And as I'm getting in the car, I felt again when one of those voices came around, and I heard, "Talk to him." I said, "Come on, God, I'm an introvert. You know that. Come on." And I felt God said, no, you need to talk to him. And so I said, okay. So I said, "Hey, what's your name, man?" He looked in the rearview mirror. "My name is Mohamad." And I said, "Oh, no." And I said it because I had a very low perspective of Muslims. I didn't know. I'm a recovering Pharisee, by the way. And so what happened as he started talking, I said, I don't know what to say to him. Because again, I'm not very good with trite conversations. I'm not the person to keep a conversation going normally. And so I said, I don't know what to say. And then I saw an image of him immediately. I saw an image of him being a very educated man in a university. I said, "Hey, Mohamad, are you like an educated man where maybe you got a master's degree from some place in the Middle East?" "How did you know? Who told you?" "Yeah, I got an MBA in Tehran." He goes, "Who told you?" And then I said, man, I don't know what else to say. He just started asking me these questions. And I saw this other image of a very large woman. But I didn't know how to talk to him about that. And so I just said, "Hey, Mohamad, is there like a big woman in your life? And he goes, yeah, and she's causing me lots of trouble. How do you know this, man? I said, listen, I'm kind of new at this stuff. I'm trying to figure out life and, listen to my God. But my guess is that he wants you to know he really knows you and loves you, man. He was quiet the rest of the way, next 45 minutes, and I was very happy. Right before we were to pull into the terminal, he said, sir, I think I'm about to cry. I said, hey, Mohamad, why don't we just pray together, man? You mind if we pray together? You want to pray with me? He goes, yeah, I'll pray with you. I said, okay, keep your eyes open. And this kind of, let's pray. And then we prayed, and right when he said amen, and we finished, we pulled up right there at the terminal, and he said, hey, he goes, something happened. My body feels different. And I said, yeah, that's God, man. He cares about you. He loves you. He loves me. I know we're different. I know you think Jesus is a prophet. I believe he's the Son of God. But, we believe in God. He got out of the car, and I'm trying to tap into this, right? Spiritual intelligence. Everything can be meaningful. Every human relationship, any connection. I can hear maybe the voice of God, or I can experience something deep and meaningful and transcendent. So I'm trying to pay attention. That 10 seconds he took to get around to open my door, I felt, honestly, God speaking to me again, I thought. And I heard, give him everything in your wallet. And I said, no. I said, God, I just went to the ATM, and there's a lot of tips I got to do in New York. And I said, no, I can't. He goes, I know you're debating whether this is me or not, but you just need to learn how to give everything away. At that point, I knew it was God, because he knew how stingy I was. And when he opened the door, I pulled out my wallet, and I said, here, God told me to give you this, man. He ran away like I had leprosy. And he got on the other side of the car, and he said, sir, I cannot take your money, for you have given me something better than money. This work is hard. It's long. It's difficult. You cannot sustain this type of effort and love in this type of deep way with people you don't normally get along with unless you have spiritual intelligence. You have to tap into that energy that you believe is God. Alan Watts, a philosopher, said, life is not a journey to a destination. Life is a dance. You're not trying to get your dance partner to some place on the dance floor. But when you're dancing with your partner, you're totally intoxicated with them. You're moving with them. And that's called the dance of life.